Our study looked at the top kid influencers on YouTube, and they found that they are making millions of dollars to advertise unhealthy products to your kids.
They sure are. Health reporter Haley Hernandez is joining us live. And Haley, this is happening at a time where kids are vulnerable to more adult diseases as well, right?
Yeah, you are absolutely right, Christine. Unfortunately, rates of adult diseases like type 2 diabetes, liver disease, those things are on the rise in children. I spoke to a pediatrician from Pasadena who says that her youngest patient with adult onset diabetes is 8 years old. And that's also a key demo for kidfluencers on YouTube to advertise junk food to children.
In 2020, most kids are getting more screen time than what's recommended, and it turns out it might have long-term health consequences, according to Dr. Lindy McGee from Harris Health in Pasadena.
And making it look like they're just playing with something, or making it look like they're just eating something, but they're getting paid to do that.
In a study published in the Journal of Pediatrics, they looked at 418 YouTube videos. 179 of them featured food and drinks, which popped up almost 300 times. Anyone searching for kid and teen videos can easily be bombarded by social media stars playing with toys, fast food, coffee, even though for decades, TV characters haven't been allowed to do things like this viral video of JoJo Siwa saying she's eating 100 Happy Meals. And yet there are no regulations for this. What's worse, your kids under 8, according to McGee, are not developmentally able to recognize ads.
For those kids, we really should be limiting their access to media and making sure that the media that they're absorbing is educational and ethical.
For older children, she says, set strict parental controls and teach them when there's ad placement, even if it doesn't look like a commercial, which isn't easy even for educated adults.
Even when you spot it, it works. It works in adults. Adults know that it's going on, but we're influenced by social media influencers who are paid to give endorsements as well.
Now, KPRC was not able to personally verify that the people shown, the stars shown in that piece did receive endorsements for these videos. But Dr. McGee says policymakers really need to consider all kinds of product placement bans in these kids' videos. She says that laws need to be written so flexible that when new media platforms pop up, it always remains against policy and unethical to advertise to children. Keith and Christine?
And Haley, because we know that social media sites tend to come and go these days, the doctors say whether that actually makes it harder to police than, say, traditional TV shows?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what she said, and that's why she says that the laws need to be written really flexibly, so with a lot of flexibility, so that these advertisers can't find these types of loopholes. And she says that these kids on YouTube, they're viewed as more real-life kids because they're not scripted, and therefore they get a lot more credibility with our children. Christine?
All right, Haley, we appreciate the update. Very eye-opening for a lot of parents out there. We appreciate it.
You understand, for example, that there are essential amino acids. That's proteins, certain ones that we have to get. There are essential fatty acids. This is taught in medical school, it's taught in dietetic school. There are essential minerals, there are essential trace minerals, there are essential vitamins. All these things are listed as essential. There is one food group for which the word essential does not exist in any of the textbooks because they're not essential. There is no such thing as an essential carbohydrate.
We often hear this phrase, nutrient-dense foods. I think the Weston A. Price Foundation was the first organization to use this phrase. Then the USDA started to using it, and when they say nutrient-dense, they mean vegetables. They say vegetables are nutrient-dense foods. So let's have a look here. This is apple, carrots, red meat, and liver. Here we have phosphorus. Phosphorus is the energy, it's your fuel for your cells, is phosphorus. A little bit in apple and carrots, way more in red meat, and much more in liver. Here's iron, a little tiny smidgen in apples and carrots, quite a bit in red meat, and look at liver. Zinc, hardly any in the plant foods. Lots in red meat and liver. In fact, red meat actually has more zinc than liver. And then copper, B2, vitamin A. There's no vitamin A in plant foods, a little bit in red meat. Look at the liver. A little vitamin C in apples and carrots, but there's actually more vitamin C in liver. And the one I like to point out is B6 and B12, which B12 has fallen off. But liver is so rich in B6 and B12, much more than even red meat. And these are critical vitamins. That's why I say if you're on a budget, you can get more nutrition from eating liver once a week than from eating red meat with every meal. So it's a very important food to include in your diet.
You know, because when we look at the food guide pyramid, which is a complete joke, and I've talked about this, they mostly advocate, the bottom section is bread, cereal, rice, and pasta, 6 to 11 servings a day. That's what our government wants us to eat the most of. It's more accurate if you actually take the food guide pyramid and reverse it upside down. Basically, just do the exact opposite of what they tell you and you're gonna be healthy. This is where it gets confusing because you look at labels and you're like, you see this little American Heart Association on your oatmeal or something. And you're like, oh, sweet, you know, this is good for my heart. And they actually studied a similar product, say it was bread. One that had the label of American Heart Association stamped on there, one that didn't have the label. The ones with the label actually had more sugar. They were completely the same. And again, when you say whole grain is the biggest piece of crap I've ever heard, because a whole grain means that you start with a frickin' kernel and then you can pulverize it, do whatever the heck you want with it. As long as you started with it before the processing occurred, you can say it's whole grain.
Everyone in my family needs more fiber in their diet. Whole grains provide fiber. Foods rich in fiber reduce the risk of diseases, such as heart disease. So I'm going to shop for whole grain. I'll look for products with whole grain in the ingredient list. Here is a brown loaf of bread, which looks like it could be whole grain. But looking closer to the ingredient list says wheat flour. That's not the same as whole wheat. So I'm going to look at a different loaf. This ingredient list says whole wheat. So this is the bread I want to buy.
The idea that fat and cholesterol cause heart disease comes from 1952 from the diet heart hypothesis. This hypothesis has been called the greatest scientific deception of this century, perhaps of any century. A hypothesis is not the truth. It's only an idea. It has to be proven. This hypothesis, since it was proposed, no other hypothesis in the world had so much research put into it. Billions have been spent all over the world to prove this hypothesis. Billions. And huge political and commercial machine has been built based on this hypothesis. To prove a hypothesis takes a long time. Science doesn't work fast. And while science was working on this hypothesis, the governments in the Western world have fully committed to it. The media touted a new breakthrough, that this is the truth. And all sorts of commercial companies jumped on the bandwagon. Pharmaceutical industry is making billions on this hypothesis. Food industry is making billions. Medical industry is making billions. Western governments are making billions. This hypothesis today we can 100% say has been proven wrong. The diet heart hypothesis is a big mistake. It has been proven wrong for the last 30 years. But because our political and commercial machine has committed to this hypothesis, they work very hard not to allow the population to know the truth, to know the real scientific truth that came out. As you already heard, 95%, maybe more, of studies in the Western world are funded by commercial companies. In English, we have a very good saying. You know, in Russia, we have another, which is very good. But it says that the one who pays the piper orders the tune, right? And what is a scientific study? They design it, they collect data, and then the data is analyzed. If any of you studied statistics, how to analyze data, you would know that there are many methods to analyze the data, depending on what result you want to get out of it. Pharmaceutical industry, food industry, and other industries which benefit from this employ an army of statisticians to do just that for them. So all of these studies, 95, almost 100% studies on this subject, we cannot trust. They're full of lies. However, the honest science has been working on it. There are honest scientists in every country around the world, and they have come up with the truth. So what did the honest science actually say? That dietary cholesterol and animal fats have nothing to do with heart disease. They do not cause heart disease. In fact, there is no connection.
Tony the Tiger.
What outfit's from Tiger?
Sugar Frosted Flakes by Kellogg's out of Battle Creek.
Never heard of it.
Never heard of Sugar Frosted Flakes? Those big crisp flakes of corn with that secret toasted in sugar frosting? They're great!
One group of rats was given rat chow. Second group of rats was given cornflakes. And the third group of rats was given the box that the cornflakes came in. So the rats that got the rat chow lived over a year. The rats that got the box lived longer than the rats that got the cornflakes. The last cornflake rat died the day the first box rat died. The box rats died of starvation. They just lay down and got listless and died. The rats that got the cornflakes became very agitated and ran around their cages and started to bite each other. And they had fits and seizures, and they died of convulsions. So there's something very neurotoxic about the cornflakes. And when they did an autopsy, they found lesions. So this is like little cancers, basically, in the nerve cells of the intestine. We have as many nerve cells in our intestines as we do in our brain. There's a big link between the intestines and the brain. So there's something quite neurotoxic about the proteins when they're extruded. And it's sort of like pasteurizing milk. You warp and distort the proteins. Same thing happens when you extrude.
Where's all the fat in a vegetarian diet? Right, we've got some in seeds and we have some in nuts. But that doesn't have any of the animal fats. EPA and DHA, which are two of the most important omega-3s, are animal fats. Your body may or may not convert them from something else. They're animal fats. They're not there. So almost everybody that's on a vegetarian diet, the only way they're even getting adequate amounts of some of the wrong fats is if they're pouring them on. They're certainly getting them naturally, because natural fats are only in high quantities, percentages, in animal foods and in some nuts and seeds.
And then there are many nutrients that they're in the plants, but they're much harder to absorb from the plants, starting with calcium. Now, in traditional diets, there were really only two sources of calcium. Either dairy foods, milk, cheese, and so forth, or bones. And cultures that did not have dairy foods made a point of eating bones. The Eskimos ate the fermented bones. They would take the bones of small animals like birds and grind them up and put them in their food. So it was either dairy foods or bones. They were not getting their calcium from vegetables. A lot of the calcium in vegetables is blocked by things like oxalic acid or phytic acid. B6, magnesium, iron, zinc, and copper, all very crucial nutrients. They are in plant foods, but they're often blocked. They're often difficult to absorb, particularly zinc. The quickest way to develop a zinc deficiency is just eat a vegan diet, because you cannot obtain adequate zinc from plant foods. And zinc is critical for not only for our brains, but for reproduction. Over 100 enzymes are dependent on zinc.
People who eat the most fat and the most cholesterol have the lowest incidence of disease, all disease. The higher your cholesterol level in your blood, the healthier you are altogether. That's what science has demonstrated conclusively. People with higher cholesterol live the longest and the healthiest lives. People who are in their 90s, 80s, and people who reach 100 usually have high blood cholesterol. And they eat eggs and bacon and butter for breakfast on a daily basis, these people, almost exclusively.
The
Because so many women are concerned about too much saturated fat in daily meals, a great change in eating habits is taking place in homes all over America. More and more women are using both Mazola corn oil and Mazola margarine. Less saturated fat because its corn oil is never hydrogenated. A delicious spread and a nutritious seasoning for vegetables, Mazola margarine is the only margarine to contain Mazola corn oil.
So, if you're concerned about too much saturated fat...
Let's talk about low blood cholesterol. It increases risk of heart disease and stroke. That is a fact. If you have low blood cholesterol, you will have high risk of heart disease and strokes. That is an absolute fact. It is associated with cancer. People who have low blood cholesterol have it low for about 18 years before they're usually diagnosed with cancer. That is the number that's been given to us by science. It is associated with violence, aggression, and suicide. We'll talk more about the brain. But what you have to understand, the brain is a fatty organ. It's got a high fat content, the brain. About 40% of that fat is cholesterol. Your brain is made from cholesterol, 40% of it. The substance called myelin coats every nerve fiber and every nerve cell in your nervous system, in your brain, in your spine, in the peripheral nervous system. It's like an insulation around electric wires. You know that electricity, all electric wires have to be insulated? Our brain works on electricity. So that's the insulation. Myelin, more than 60% of it is cholesterol. The rest is saturated fat. That is what myelin is. So when you start reducing blood cholesterol levels, you're putting brain under grave danger. Because brain has cell regeneration processes going on all the time. Cells in the brain do die, and they get replaced by newly born cells. These processes are very active. And these new baby cells need building materials to be made from. They have to be made from cholesterol, saturated fats, proteins, glyconutrients, and some other things, but a large percent is fat and cholesterol. And if the blood cholesterol is low, the brain is not getting enough to maintain its structure and to function properly.
Scoop it in a baked potato. Spice it up with salsa. Swirl it in pasta.
Oh, I've got a meeting.
Meeting? You've got a floor to wax.
Me?
Knudsen low-fat cottage cheese. Now it comes in 4 packs.
I found a recipe you won't find in a cookbook, but it's sure nutritious and a real money saver too. Take a quart of Carnation Instant Non-Fat Dry Milk. Add a quart of whole milk. Mix, chill, and serve. You get 2 quarts of fresh-tasting low-fat milk.
People with low blood cholesterol have aggressive personalities and poor self-control. Carl Pfeiffer, a renowned American doctor who did research in American prisons, has discovered that more than 80% of violent offenders, people who committed murder and other violent crimes, had low blood cholesterol. More than 85%. Low blood cholesterol makes the brain starve, the brain cannot function well, the person becomes angry, these people are easily irritated, they easily attack, they easily become aggressive, and they are prone to violence and crime. It is associated with Parkinson's disease. Indeed, now we know that statins cause Parkinson's disease. We have an epidemic of Parkinson's disease. It's growing very rapidly. Without doubt, large percent of that epidemic is due to anti-cholesterol pills that people are taking. Because the brain is a fatty organ, it requires cholesterol. And if it doesn't get enough, it will manifest symptoms. It is associated with memory loss. In fact, memory loss is the #1 side effect of statin drugs. The brain cannot function, you can't remember anything. Because in order to form memories in the brain, synapses have to be formed. The cells in the brain have long arms. They grow long arms to communicate with each other. And when the 2 arms of 2 cells come together, they have to do this. They have to create a synapse here and a synapse here and they have to connect. Now the synapses are almost exclusively made out of cholesterol and saturated fat. If your blood cholesterol is low, that is the only place your brain can get cholesterol from. It can manufacture some, but not enough. Then the brain can't form these synapses. So the cells cannot connect with each other. As a result, the person cannot create memories. And it is the short-term memory that suffers. The person might remember what happened in the childhood, because those synapses were formed in the childhood, but he doesn't remember what he had for breakfast, and where he put his car keys, or where he left his hat, or his shoes, or something else. The short-term memory is not being formed, because the brain doesn't have enough building materials, resources to create memories. These people can't learn anything new, because in order to learn something, we have to remember it. We can't form memory.
I can't believe I used to swing over those rocks. Took some foolish risks as a teenager. But I was still taking a foolish risk with my cholesterol. Anyone with high cholesterol may be at increased risk of heart attack. Diet and exercise weren't enough for me. I stopped kidding myself. I've been eating healthier, exercising more, and now I'm also taking Lipitor. If you've been kidding yourself about high cholesterol, stop. Along with diet, Lipitor has been shown to lower bad cholesterol 39 to 60%. Lipitor is FDA approved to reduce the risk of heart attack and stroke in patients who have heart disease or risk factors for heart disease.
Lipitor is not for everyone, including people with liver problems and women who are nursing, pregnant, or may become pregnant.
I had a heart attack at 57. My doctor told me I should have been doing more for my high cholesterol. What was I thinking? But now, I trust my heart to Lipitor.
When diet and exercise are not enough, adding Lipitor may help. Unlike some other cholesterol-lowering medications, Lipitor is FDA approved to reduce the risk of heart attack, stroke, and certain kinds of heart surgeries if you have several common risk factors or heart disease. Lipitor has been extensively studied with over 16 years of research.
We have an epidemic of Alzheimer's disease. Western governments are in absolute panic because it is a terrible epidemic and it's like an avalanche coming onto humanity. Alzheimer's disease, dementia. Vast percent of that epidemic is due to statins because every one of these people are taking these drugs. The brain is starving. It cannot form synapses. As a result, the person cannot learn anything, cannot remember anything, and develops Alzheimer's disease. It is associated with poor immunity because our immune cells are high-fat cells. Large percent of the cell membrane and the membranes inside the cell, which form organelles, are made out of cholesterol and saturated fat. And immune cells live a very short life, only a few days, many of them. And when there is any infection in the body, there's a fight going on, many of them die. So your bone marrow has to work very hard to give birth to new baby cells, immune cells, because all your immune cells are born in the bone marrow. Bone marrow is a high cholesterol organ. It has a very high composition of cholesterol. And again, most of that cholesterol comes to your bone marrow from the blood. If you have a low level of cholesterol in your blood, your bone marrow is starving. It cannot manufacture immune cells, blood cells, and many other cells. As a result, you become prone to infections. Western governments are all running around with these hospital infections, MRSA. You've heard of that, haven't you? That hospital infections have become a big problem. Why? Because every patient in these hospitals older than 40 is on statins. They have reduced their cholesterol level in the blood. They are unable to fight infections. In order to fight an infection, we need LDL cholesterol. That is a major, major part of any fight with any infection in the blood. Your immune system requires large amounts of LDL cholesterol. And what are they doing? They're giving them statins. LDL cholesterol is low. The person cannot fight any infection. They're completely defenseless, these patients. That is why we have hospital infections. That is a major, major cause of it.
Because of high cholesterol, 1 out of 4 adults is gambling with heart disease. You could leave it to chance or do something about it with a diet including Fleischmann's margarine, 0 cholesterol, low saturated fat.
For great bacony crunch without cholesterol, bring home the Bacos.
Learning disabilities in children and adults. without doubt, mother's breast milk is very rich in cholesterol. It has a high content of cholesterol. More than that, it has an enzyme in it to make sure that the baby's digestive system absorbs 100% of that cholesterol. Not one molecule of it gets wasted when babies are breastfeeding. Why? Because the baby's brain and eyes and bone marrow and other high-fat organs require large amounts of cholesterol to form themselves properly. Manufacturers of formula feed for babies know this fact. But because of all the propaganda with cholesterol, they don't put any cholesterol in formulas. That is why it is a very high rate amongst formula-fed babies. They have a very high percentage of poor ability to learn, lower intelligence, problems with behavior, and glasses. They have poor eyesight because their eyes didn't form properly in these children. And infections as well, because bone marrow is not being properly formed. It is associated with early death. People with low blood cholesterol don't live long. They die early.
Every diet contained animal foods. This was Dr. Price's greatest disappointment. He had hoped to find a culture where they were only eating plant foods and that was healthy. And he did not find this, and he admitted that he was wrong. They went to great risk to obtain the animal foods, great effort and risk to obtain the animal foods. And all of the sacred foods were animal foods. In Dr. Price's opinion, the most important animal food was fish and shellfish. He not only described living skull structure, but he always took calipers with him, and he asked the primitive people to show him the skulls of their ancestors. And he measured the thickness of the skulls. And the people who ate the most fish and shellfish had the thickest skulls. Many cultures ate birds, chickens, ducks, geese, wild birds, always with the organs, fat, and skin. They didn't want skinless chicken breasts, you know, that was, and which is basically inedible anyway. And then a lot of cultures ate red meat, beef, goat, sheep, game, etc., with the organ meats and the fat preferred. In fact, they would hunt animals when they knew that they were fat because they wanted that fat. In Australia, the Aboriginal people, if they killed a kangaroo that didn't have enough fat on it, that was called rubbish. And they would just throw it away. It was not worth eating. Many cultures had dairy products from cows, sheep, goats, camels, water buffalo, reindeer, you know, all different species. Always raw or cultured, never pasteurized. And many cultures ate eggs from birds that are outside. And reptiles and insects, again, very important foods, not for us, but for other cultures. I'm not here to tell you you have to eat insects, but we have to recognize that these were nutrient-dense foods in many cultures.
In some cells, depending the function of the cell in the body, depending on where this cell is in the body, some of them have 70% cholesterol in their cell membrane, some have 30. So there's a range between 30 and 70% of cholesterol in the cell membranes in the body. Every cell, about 70% of every cell are membranes. So you can do the calculations yourself. What percent of your body is actually cholesterol and saturated fat? It is more than 50%. You are made from cholesterol. It is a structural element of every cell in your body. And you are made from saturated fats. This is a structural element. And because the cells in the body constantly die and get replaced by newly born cells, building materials are required to build those new baby cells from, to give birth to them. So our bodies require large amounts of cholesterol all the time for that process, and saturated fats as well.
The cats began to fight among one another, and everything he found, like I said before, this is just Pottinger looking at cats. Everything he found was exactly the same as what we see today with human health, because we are eating in ways that are not similar to what our body would most closely desire. So we've got all sorts of emotional problems today. They didn't have them before. They weren't there. They just didn't exist. If only we could teach our traditionally trained psychiatrists that one of the most important things for them to do is change their patients' diets. But of course, you don't want to do something that gets rid of patients. The idea is you get to see them over and over and over again. My entire goal is to see people so that then they don't need me anymore. Doctors don't seem to understand that that should be their goal. There's something that's usually said as a joke. It's not a joke, it was true, but it was true thousands of years ago, that in China, the doctor only was paid while the people remained healthy. Because as soon as the person wasn't healthy anymore, it meant the doctor hadn't done his job correctly, and he no longer got any money. Well, it would be nice if we did that today. Of course, if we did that today, doctors would not be an occupation people would want because they'd all be in poverty, because none of them would get paid, because the patients aren't getting healthy. We're just suppressing their symptoms and bringing up additional side effects.